I
Did
didn't
you
get the.
watch did you watch La Strada?
I've seen it like a million times, so
All
we're good.
right.
I actually, um, I just picked up a VCR off the road, and I have La Strada on VHS.
No
So
way.
I was like, I'm gonna watch La Strada
What?
on VHS. I came in and I tried it last night, and it actually works perfectly. Like it's got like English subs and everything. It's just La
Oh,
Strada on
okay. I was
VHS.
about to ask if it was like the English dub
No,
version of
this is
it.
like no, it's with Italian with subs. I got this because my college, like 5 years ago, I was walking by and they had like that shelf of library books they were just giving away because they're getting rid of them. And for some reason, La Strada was in that pile on VHS. And I was with a girl I was trying to rizz up at the time. And I said, "Hold on,
Oh,
female." I said, "Hold on, female. I'll be right back." And I came back holding a copy of La Strada on VHS, to which I got the look that said, "What the fuck is wrong with you?"
exactly. When I try to rizz up the girls, I'm like, "Have you read my Gene Kelly book?"
Yeah, exactly. You're like, one thing you should know about me. I also dressed as Gelsomina for Halloween once.
I thought you were gonna do some black white stripes today.
I didn't have an actually, I think I might have a Nirvana shirt that has black and white stripes on it. I can probably switch.
I figured if there's any time to rock the your cult boyfriend signature, it's now. Look at that.
Oh, it's so true. It used to be my signature. I need to bring it back.
So I love this movie. I love it so much. Happy I finally get to talk about it. La Strada, 1954, Julietta Messina, Anthony Quinn. Uh,
Yeah, La Strada.
hey, hey. Okay. So why don't you start it? Why don't you start the analysis?
About La Strada. Can I say
Yeah.
my relationship to it?
Yeah, I knew you liked it.
Yeah. Well, I originally didn't like it.
Well, I
Um,
didn't know that.
no, well, it was because that was like back when I was young into movies and on internet forums. And some of my friends were started like at the time being like, there's this Italian movie. It's called La Strada. It's like the greatest movie ever made. And everyone was telling me to watch it at the time, all like my internet friends. And I watched it. But how long is La Strada?
Like hour 45,
I
hour
watched it
48.
roughly, I started it roughly an hour and 50 minutes before I had to drive to work. And then I had to keep going to the bathroom. And so and I ended up being late to work because of it. But because of that, I was like, all right, can we wrap this up like the whole time I was watching? And I was like half into it. And then I was like, yeah, it was all right. I wasn't really into it. And then like I couldn't get like the visuals and the situations and Julieta Messina out of my head. I was like, I gotta watch this again. And I think literally only like a few weeks later I watched it again and loved it and proceeded to see it like several times. And I don't know. I feel like I'm not as into Fellini anymore as I once was. I mean, like I never really liked Eight and a Half. I always thought that movie was kind of one of his lesser ones, but I love La Dolce Vita. But
Yes.
I haven't seen that in so long.
I,
Um,
I I think that's a good place for me to start like an actual analysis of the movie
yeah,
too. Spoilers for maybe a lot of Fellini films, but La Dolce Vita is probably Amarcord or La Dolce Vita are my favorite Fellini movies.
yeah.
La Dolce Vita
What
has
was the
such a
first one?
La Dolce Vita or Amarcord.
Oh, Amarcord. Gotcha.
Yeah. Um, But the ending of La Dolce Vita gets me every single time. It works so well with our main character played by Marcello is out on the beach by
Yeah,
the ocean and he sees what Fellini has set up as an angel, a young girl looking at him. And he's abandoned all to nihilism at this point and just can't hear her at all. And he's just like, he puts up his hands in that remarkably classic, iconic way of just I can't hear your meaning, and goes
yeah.
off. La Strada, I think, is really cool because it might be the first time that Fellini is separating himself from Rossellini. And this movie was really controversial when it first came out, but we'll get into that in a second. What I
Yeah.
find most interesting about it analytically is the character of the fool. So the
Yeah.
film is about Gelsomina and Zampano, um,
Oh no.
a strong man and basically like the most natural clown you could ever meet in your life. Uh, a remarkably interesting young woman, but strikes up a friendship with this character called the Fool, who we first see on like a high wire eating spaghetti with angel wings on his back. And he's the
Yeah.
one who actually provides not only the film, but Gelsomino with purpose, her purpose, saying that everything has a purpose. The parable of the pebble is what it's called. And like he's like, everything has a purpose, even this pebble. And I think that both Gelsomina and him are presented pretty angelically, but the fool is uniquely angelic in the sense that once he dies, it's as if purpose dies for Gelsomina as well, or even for the film itself until it's found again in the film's final moments. What do you think?
I agree. I think it's also essential for Zampano as a moment because it's like I don't know, like the whole movie feels like Zampano being given numerous opportunities to be a good person and like he's getting it's kind of like a sort of determinist movie in the sense that it's just like, you know, there is a path being set for you, but you have to opt into it. And Zampano is like being given this like this path that is so good, and the two people associated with it are like visually and thematically aligned with like angels or purity or
Yes.
goodness, etc. And he's like being like offered these things on like a silver platter, and he just keeps rejecting them every time.
And now
And
that
then
you say that, it makes me think that it's like mankind, men
yeah,
being allowed
exactly,
so many
because he's just
opportunities.
angry. He's too angry at the world. He I think there's a clip. I don't usually love his analyses of movies, but there's um a a video of Scorsese talking about it. He's like Zampano, he describes Zampano as a guy who like hates himself and also the world around him, and like has like
Hmm.
forsaken all opportunities at like love because he doesn't believe in love anymore. And it's like he's given all these reasons to have a good life, and he just keeps rejecting it. And I think that's essential because it's like he like you said, he is kind of like emblematic of everybody around him. He's kind of like this stand-in for mankind, because of course, like the era in Italy in which the film was made, and the context, the historical context of the movie, and so you just have like Giulietta Messina, who like they never like pathologize her. Like you're led to believe she's like, you know, not all there. Like maybe
Little
she's
addled. Yeah.
yeah, she's got like some kind of like developmental disorder, but we did they never like clarify that, and it's not really necessary to. And and then the fool is just that, like he's almost like idiotically optimistic. Um
Yeah, there are two different kinds of clowns here, and they're angelic
yeah.
in Fellini's world. And I like that you did bring up Scorsese because what I firmly believe is his greatest film by Scorsese's own account would not exist without La Strada. The Raging Bull owes
Mhm.
so much to
Yeah.
Zampano
Yeah, Jake
in
LaMotta
particular.
is just like Zampano.
Hmm. And music is incredibly important to this film too. Like what almost ties the Fool and Gelsomina together mystically is the fact that like we get that
Mhm.
that Nino Rota kind of melody that is Gelsomina's theme song, and then it's transferred to the Fool on his
Yeah.
little toy violin later on.
Yeah.
Um, and it's I think that's obviously showing that they are sharing not just similar archetypal spaces, but similar modes of being, similar expressions. Like those two characters
Engagement
almost
with the world.
exist outside of the narrative or larger than the narrative itself. Because Zampano doesn't seem to even recognize that music until the very end, where he's also
Yeah.
finally is infected, not infected by it, but finally is intoxicated by it and makes him so sorrowful that he breaks down. Also, like in La Dolce Vita, he breaks
On
down
the beach.
on the beach.
On the beach because it's, you know, the horizon is just infinite
Yeah.
possibilities. But
Whereas
for
La Dolce
Zampano,
Vita,
it's
like he can't hear the meaning anymore.
yeah.
Zampano can't have them. Like he allowed the meeting to die. He abandoned it, and he knows it's all his fault. It's much more tragic.
Well, yeah, because I see him on the beach, and it's like the beach is associated with like, the horizon, like all the possibilities, all the places you can go, and like
Hmm.
paths you can choose, and
Well,
he
it's
has
directly associated with Gelsomina too. The first scene of the movie
exactly,
is the beach and her with the kids, and
exactly.
yeah,
And he just like closed off all those possibilities. He restricted himself every step of the way. Um, which I find him extremely tragic because, it's I bring up this as an example a lot lately, but it's like the Jack Torrance thing where it's like Stephen King's idea of tragic is this guy who was made this way, and Kubrick's idea of tragic is a guy who chooses to be this way. Zampano, I think is a guy who chooses to be like this, because he's just like so disillusioned with everything
yeah,
around him. He really just hates everything around him, and then at the end of the movie he's like, I can't hate anymore, but I don't have an out anymore. Like I had the out and I didn't take the out, and now I'm just stuck here with everyone else, like toiling in my own like self-loathing and suffering, and it's just depressing because it almost minimizes the fool's monologue, because the fool's monologue is all about like how all of this matters, um because they make, because Gelsomina and him make it matter, but because he doesn't let those things that matter, at the end he's just like nothing means anything anymore, which I think is a good like
yeah,
metaphor in its own way for the world at Europe at that point in time, is that like these things were valuable and meant something, and now they no longer, like
yeah,
now the fool is a fool. Now we look at the fool, we hear his monologue, and we're like, he's like bullshitting, it almost sounds like he's bullshitting because it sounds so artificial, but it's like it did mean something and now it doesn't mean anything anymore. Like the
exactly.
pebble
And
doesn't matter
that's
anymore.
what ruined Gelsomina's entire
Yeah,
psychology
exactly. She
after he
can't look at
died.
the pebble and see something meaningful anymore. At the end of the
Yeah,
movie, she sees just like a rock. She's like,
and
it's a
just keeps
rock.
repeating that the fool is hurt, the fool is hurt, the fool is hurt.
Yeah.
It's ridiculously heartbreaking.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
well, we should talk about Fellini's usage of clowns and circus themes. A clown, I think that I don't know who came up with this, but I've always loved it. You know, a comedian tells jokes to get laughs. A clown is the joke, and the joke is human failure. Like a clown is
Yeah.
normally a caricature of failure itself, which makes the fool almost the best clown that I
Yeah,
can
exactly.
imagine. He can't
Exactly.
like you can feel like this is what I find so complex about his relationship with Gelsomina. You can feel a chemistry or attraction, but the fool is too foolish to be kind to her. Like he's borderline without the whipping and abusiveness. Like he's just as mean to her as
Yeah.
Zampano is in a
Yeah.
very large way. But that's because I think he becomes a caricature of Zampano in order to get his parable out there.
Yeah.
Um,
And also just because he's like turns everything into a joke to a fault. At first it's kind of liberating to see the world in that way, to find the humor in these horrible situations, but then it keeps going and going, and then you kind of stop seeing the things that are serious as serious. Whereas of course Zampano is like too much serious.
yeah,
He's unwilling to entertain any humor in existence, whereas the fool is like, I exclusively see the humor in existence, and neither is really tenable and over time. But
yes, I'd like to talk about the relatability of the characters. I mean, it's impossible not to see Giulietta Messina in these and I think it's worth noting, obviously, that Messina was Fellini's wife, and they had a great creative pairing, not only in La Strada but Nights of Cabiria and Juliet of the
yeah,
Spirits.
which are
But
my three favorite Fellinis.
interesting. La Strada's up there. It's up there.
Lestrada's my favorite. I've kind of always gravitated most to the Messina films.
You
That's
can see a different kind of inspiration, and he's also, I mean, in all fairness, for Fellini, he's, and this is going to sound like a huge criticism, but he's thinking less with his dick and more with his heart.
yeah,
um
which is rare for Fellini.
yeah, Yeah. Um, but the character I always related to was the fool. I find myself acting like that in a lot of situations, seemingly like self-destructive, but at the same time, entertaining. And like I
Yeah.
don't know. I really like that character.
No, I
The
agree.
doomed nature of the character. Like he knows he's about to die. He even says as much. Like when he leaves, they're like, "I'm gonna die soon anyway." It's just it's just supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
and it's foolish. Like when the strong man finds him on the side of the road fixing a flat tire, the foolish thing to do would be to make fun of him again, knowing he's about to beat you to death, and then try to actually fight the strong man back. Like that's insanely foolish. I have no,
yeah.
it just all
Yeah.
fits with his character. I found the fool such an intensely relatable character, especially those missed opportunities based on his own like character. Like he and
Yeah.
Gelsomina had a great deal of chemistry, and I think would have been a lot better off for each other. But
Yeah.
the fool is too foolish to be
Yeah.
vulnerable like that.
I think part of it is also that he's not the one that needed her
Yeah.
to
Well, I don't know.
change. Well, because she doesn't change anything about his worldview by the end. Like I feel like like had he not died, he would have remained like largely the same, whereas like Zampano undergoes this enormous
Well,
change in its
I
nature.
think that she already had, but in one of those like Fellini mystical ways, because Zampano
I
and
see.
him like hate each other already, and
Yeah, just by
Julieta,
default.
well, not just by default, because Gelsomina like, does this have to do with Rosa, who is her sister, who originally lived
Hmm,
with
hmm.
Zampano but died mysteriously, and
Which
like,
I always forget, like every time I watch the movie, because it's such like it's like those details in the birds, like stuff that's
mm,
like built up as this big mystery, and you're like, oh, by the end of the movie, I'm gonna get some resolution on this, and you never get any resolution really.
exactly,
As I at
and.
least as I recall, like it's like you're just kind of like left like, wait, go back to that. Like I want to know what
Yeah,
happened. And
and I
it's
think when Gelsomina is first sold to Zampano by her like family or mother or
yeah.
whatever, they're like, doesn't she look like Rosa? And it's heavily implied that the fool had something to do with Rosa, probably romantic given how much Zampano wants to
Mm,
murder him.
mm,
So like in a weird Fellini mystical kind of way, a girl who looked just like her probably set his world, his heart on fire, you know, and Zampano destroyed that likely. I
yeah.
mean that I'm assuming all of that because Fellini gives us nothing to work
Yeah.
with there except for like vague like Gelsomina says, "Is this have something to do with Rosa?" And Zampano goes, "Shut up!" Like that's as close as we get
Yeah.
to
Well,
clarity on why they hate each other.
this is probably increasingly obvious, but yeah, I relate most to Zampano here.
Well,
Just more in his attitude to the world than anything else, if that makes sense. And like
that's
the
what I
way,
relate to the fool about. What's his
yeah,
attitude on the world, though? It's so selfish and
yeah. Well, they're both selfish, I think. By the end, I mean, Gelsomina is the only one who's not, but she's like polluted by proximity to these people, almost.
right. But I would
It,
definitely give the fool the
yeah.
upper hand here,
Oh
philosophically,
no, like
psychologically.
he's better as a
Yeah.
person than Zampano. Zampano literally like beats women, possibly killed his wife, possibly killed Gelsavina's sister. We don't know. Um, but it's more like his attitude, like his inability to kind of view things optimistically, kind of
Mhm.
causes his life to go a certain way. It's almost like to me like a Spinoza thing where it's like you're predetermined insofar as like the way you think and feel causes your life to go a certain way regardless of your choices. And so the way he feels about things almost causes these things to happen to him, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah,
he holds some sort of he holds a responsibility for things getting here almost purely because of his attitude. And I think that could be said of all the characters in this movie and a lot of Fellini characters in general. Like we can say the same about Marcello Mastroianni and Eight and a half and La Dolce Vita is like their attitudes towards the people around them in the world color their relationships with them, which in turn color like the things that happen to them, and then it's only your fault by the end. They always end up on a beach depressed and wanting to die.
Hmm.
Even sort of in eight and a half, he ends up, in a big open field where they have that movie set, and he's just kind of like lost and aimless, and it's all pointless. And I forget exactly how Knights of Cabiria ends actually because I haven't seen it in a while, but
Well, something that's interesting. Maybe it's because it is a little earlier in his career, 54, and Dolce
yeah.
Vita's 60. The Dolce Vita doesn't seem at all interested in the idea of redemption or redeeming anyone.
Yeah, that Lestrada definitely is interested in that. Like, it's
Yeah,
obviously about like the absence, like they end up not being redeemed, but it's about desiring to be redeemed or like you wanting the characters to be redeemed, which never happens later on. Like you said, like La
yeah.
Dolce Vita, absolutely the fuck not. But
That's one of the most beautiful nihilistic films I've ever seen. But
yeah,
La Strada is just so meaningful in so many different ways. And when it was first released, it was seen as controversial by the Italian filmmakers of the
hmm,
time, and
hmm,
a lot of the more left critics, because
yeah,
this marks his big departure, probably from neorealism. Correct? It likely does. And it was seen as a betrayal to Italian cinema, which is bizarre to me. I think Rossellini was moving away from it by this time as well. Antonioni was about to be
yeah,
doing his
exactly.
own thing.
Because I
Um,
think a few years after this was his Rossellini's first film with Ingrid Bergman, which is really like almost the exact point where a change happens.
mhm,
It's like you can like pinpoint the exact moment where he went from like a more traditional. I mean, I hate to say traditional because like all of his movies, really, Paisan is the first Rossellini movie that becomes like modernist because it starts
probably.
experimenting with genre forms. It's like it starts as one genre and moves to different genres. But that in its own way is why I'm kind of like always been surprised by the reaction to Lestrada because I guess people expect it to be more sober. Like Gelsomina isn't a character you would expect to see in a movie described as neorealist because
Right.
she's almost like a comic character. I mean, obviously everyone since it came out has compared her in it to Chaplin. Like that's the most obvious point of
Mhm.
comparison is that she's a lot like Chaplin in the movie. And even her acting style is very old fashioned even for 1954. It's very like 20s. It's very 20s, even like early 30s style acting. It's not contemporary performance style in the slightest, least of all in Italy in the 50s.
Yeah.
That's like the least relevant style of performance. In a way, so much about La Strada is very old fashioned. I mean, like these narratives about like brutal men and like the women they brutalize, like that, even that like just makes me think of like Broken Blossoms and movies that came out in the
Sure.
40s and 30s. And then, circuses were a big thematic archetype. I get whatever you want to call it in silent cinema, like
Yeah.
Chaplin, Browning, like Carl Fern, like everyone was making movies about circuses in like the 20s and 30s. And so something about La Strada has always felt like out of time, which I think is what draws me to it
Yes.
still, is it feels unlike the movies that were being. But anyway, the point I was getting to is that like I feel like neorealism kind of hit its stride once people stopped making movies in such like a sober way. Like once you
Right.
got over the hump of like what most people think of as neorealist, which tends to be like Bicycle Thieves, which is a masterpiece, but De Sica in general, once they start experimenting in strange ways because they realize obviously like genre forms actually do reflect real life in big ways. And so that's why I think Paisan is so major, is that like so much of that movie is like genres, like they're cycling through different genres through across that movie. And that's like the moment where Rossellini was like, wait a minute, what the fuck have I been doing all this time?
Right.
and
And
and and then he makes Europe 51 and Journey to Italy, and all of that
and
changes.
Germany Year Zero right after Paisan, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And I feel like Lestrada is in its own way kind of a precursor to that because it's like there's actually something more real, more true to life in these what I'm sure at the time seemed to viewers to be like caricatures. I'm sure at the time they viewed like Anthony Quinn as like a caricature and like Gelsomina as like over the top and ridiculous and like completely out of place in the more refined style that they was popular at the time. I'm sure that's the attitude towards it, but in that in its own way actually is more real,
Right.
more relatable, more true to life. Like we see ourselves more in like the Fool and Zampano and
Exactly.
like the and then in anyone in I don't know
So,
Rome Open City.
yeah, well, speaking of Rome Open City, like Fellini's relationship with neorealism wasn't just this guy who betrayed. He was there from, if I'm not
From the start.
mistaken, yeah, he was a writer on Rome Open City, if I'm not
Exactly.
mistaken. He's not
I'm
just a
pretty sure you are
pupil.
correct.
Yeah, not he's not just a pupil of Rossellini. He was there.
Yeah.
He was there when the old magic was written, or whatever the meme is.
Yeah.
Um, but La Strada, you can definitely see where more left critics would have a problem with it. We are dealing with like two homeless circus performers for the most part, and it doesn't have a lot to say about social stratification at all.
By the
We
way,
aren't.
he did
Yeah,
three Rossellini movies
he
as a
did
script
three.
critic. He did Rome Open City, Paisan, and The
Oh, wow.
Flowers of Saint Francis, which I
There you
think
go.
is very revealing, because that those are the exact movies that marked Rossellini's shift towards modernism. But
Right. And this is kind of marking it's so subtle in La Strada, but there are surrealist motifs
oh no,
throughout,
100%.
which I think, at least visually, thematically, would be the probably the largest betrayal viewed by Fellini within this movie,
Hmm.
uh, when it
Which
comes
is
to neorealism. Um,
which is
but
funny because surrealism, I think, has is equally now associated with like left wing cinema, political filmmaking. I mean, Buñuel,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
which is funny because Buñuel actually did the opposite arc in a way. He like started with surrealism and then moved to this sort of neorealism in his Mexican films, with like Nazarin and Los Olvidados, but then later returned to surrealism. So I feel like there's always been this like link between surrealism and realism. I mean, just look at Bresson. Bresson
yeah.
is considered like the apex of austerity, but he was molded by his association with the surrealist movement in the 20s and 30s. Like that was really essential to his intellectual development. So yeah, I agree. Like Fellini, those things like I understand why it was controversial, but looking back now, it makes so much sense.
It does. And I'm sure the fact that it won the very first Academy Award for Best Foreign Picture did not help
I
this film's
forgot about
reputation.
that.
Yeah.
It's even on my case. It's they won. They
I'm sure
won.
that didn't help its reputation in like the more socialist eyes that were criticizing him.
I mean,
Um,
Fellini has always been kind of, I feel like the Italian director that's kind of like outside of that. I mean, like even I don't know. I feel like in internet circles over the past like decade or so, in my observation, Fellini is associated more with like the people like just getting into movies who are like just starting to explore world cinema, and then they're like,
mm,
and then sweetheart, when you're older, we'll show you the big boys like Pasolini and Rossellini, and then you can get to the big boy cinema. And I've always kind of resisted that because, like I said, I have kind of drifted away from Fellini, but I still feel like he is so important and
yeah.
essential.
Oh no, he's easily one of my favorite
Yeah.
filmmakers. I have no issue with him distancing himself from neorealism, which he
No, me
arguably
neither.
pioneered.
I think it
Uh,
was
I,
necessary.
I mean, we're getting into a place which is so unique, so creative, so Fellini-esque that
Yeah.
he would own the next 15 years
Yeah,
of
pretty
world
much.
cinema. And
Exactly.
do really until you get to Amarcord, where they'll have like fascist satirizations, but seemingly without without like value, without like
Yeah.
value statements within them. And I don't know how you do that, but that takes a real master.
It's also fairly brave at the time, to be doing that. I mean, like God, when Fellini was doing like Juliet of the Spirits, Like, well, like I think that was when like Rossellini went in the complete opposite direction and he started doing his history
Yeah.
films. You know, he was making like Taken of Power by Louis the 14th, while Fellini was doing like Amarcord and Juliet of the Spirits and like the Satyricon and shit like that. It's like completely different paths
Well,
and fully
1960 is probably one of the most important years
fruitful,
in Italian cinema,
easily.
mostly because of La Dolce Vita and La
Yeah.
Ventura by Antonioni being released that same year. You can see two different ways that
Yeah.
neorealism can bring about a whole new form of
Oh
expression
yeah, I
through
mean
through
like
cinema.
we're talking about like Paisan and Knights of Cabiria, but imagine like just like a few years later, yeah, like La Ventura drops, and you're like, bro, these feel like
Yeah,
they must have been like 20 years apart. Like I feel like decades must have happened between La Strada and La Ventura. Like it's like completely different worlds, but that also makes sense because Antonioni was young and Fellini was like a product of the war and such. So it makes sense, but still there's something so fascinating about that. That's why I love in Histoire du Cinema by Godard, there's a whole episode that's almost exclusively about how Italy after the war was like the only country to like reckon with this shit.
right.
And like you know, he has a whole section about that, like how he's like the British did jack shit, the Americans were cowards, the French did nothing, but Italy, he's like they were the ones like actually confronting this like world historical traumatic
Yeah,
event. And you see it in so many ways. Like you see it here. I mean, you see it right down to Knights of Cabiria, just a movie about a prostitute.
exactly. Well,
It's like,
with Lestrada, we're talking about completely different things than we would have um, just a year or two earlier for Fellini. I think before this one, it was like Eva Aloni, probably about like the
yeah,
group
which
of
I've
guys.
never been a huge fan
Me
of.
neither. Me neither.
I could never really get into it. I appreciate it. I know it's like Kubrick's favorite movie of all time, but I was like,
Really,
yeah, I'm pretty sure Eva
I
Loney
I know he
is
loved
pretty.
Lenote, which you can see in Eyes Wide Shut pretty clearly. He
Oh
loved
yeah,
Lenote.
100%.
Um,
No, Kubrick was like a super fan of that movie. And which is why I originally watched. I was like, "Ooh, if he likes it." And then I saw it. I was like, "I don't like this as much as his Juliet the Messina movies," but I
right.
don't. But that was also like for a few years of time. Like I remember vividly. Like it this I got into Fellini like a lot of people did, like right when I got into like European cinema and like that the whole 20th century European canon of like Fellini, Truffaut, uh
Yes.
Antonioni. Like I got into all those guys at the same time, Kurosawa even. And like so like La Strada was like a huge pivot point for me where I'm like, holy fucking shit. Like which is I think why I found it so unsuspecting at first is that like at first it seems like really plain. It almost seems less flashy.
Yeah. Why do you think it's so effective? Do you think it is because it's more simple yet
No,
like
I
archetypally like complicated? Like why?
kind of. I think it's partly because he's pulling from like so many different things and like sources of inspiration. Like I said, I feel like there's this huge influence of silent filmmaking on it, and which is, of course, a lot of that was about the movement of people in space rather than
Mm.
the cuts and the movement of the camera moving them. It's you know, like think of like Fouillade, like Les Vampires and stuff in Phantoma, where it's just like every shot in every Fouillade movie is like a square. You know, like you just get a shot of the room in Les Vampires every shot for like 8 hours or however long it is. And it's just how people move around the space. I think you get a lot of that in La Strada. There's a lot of subtlety in the way it's directed that I think is kind of easy to ignore and not really
Yeah.
recognize, like the way they switch who's dominant in the frame and such, and like uh the kind of physicality of some of the cuts, like the performances where Zampano is breaking the chain on his chest. Those moments are like really tactile. Also, I just remembered actually on the subject, I read this like portion of an interview about from Anthony Quinn talking about how this was like the first time he felt like he was a true actor because he's like Fellini was apparently on his fucking case the whole shoot, like making him redo scenes and he's like giving adjustments and having him try it. He's like, this is the first time where I was like, I felt like I was really like putting myself out there and being like putting myself under criticism and adjustments and like really tailoring myself to like the vision of this guy. And he's like, that made me take acting seriously in a way I had never taken it seriously before. And so I feel like kind of like a lot of movies from the 30s in a way, where it's like it took people looking back later to realize like there's so much under the hood in this movie. It looks very simple, but there's a lot of detail, a lot of decisions being made at like every second that are really nuanced and motivated, like really motivated decisions from the director. That's why I like this more than I always forget how to say it. Vitelloni, il
Yeah, yeah, I don't.
Vitelloni.
It's not good
Uh,
enough to know how to say.
I just like how every decision just feels so motivated in
Hmm.
this plot. It's just like such a driven movie. Like Fellini was really possessed to do something with this material. Um, and
And
I don't know how to describe it in a way that really makes sense. It's just there's something about it that feels like very considered when I watch it, and that kind of elevates this what on the surface seems very kind of low key compared to something like eight and a half, for instance, where like eight and a half is very ostentatious. You know, like eight and a half opens with your main character flying in the sky as a balloon.
and
And
La Dolce Vita opens with
yeah,
Christ flying through the sky as a statue
exactly.
over bikini-clad babes. Like,
Exactly. And then Amarcord is fucking Amarcord. And
yeah.
you know, it's just over time it became more and more and more ostentatious, which I support and I think the movies are great. But it aside from eight and a half, which like I said, I never really vibed with. I tried so hard. I've watched it like five times. I even bought it because I was like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna really like eight and a half. And I'm like, it never happened. I
Although
even like
I like it for the record. Anyone watching, I
yeah, I
like
don't
eight
know.
and a
It's
half.
just something about it. It's always the same part. I'm always like into it for the first half or so, and then it's the part where they're watching the dailies at the theater. And that's
Uh,
always the exact part where I'm like, I'm good. I'm like, this was a good movie. It's over now. Like, I'm done. I'm good. I don't know. I've never really vibed with it. La Dolce Vita, I fucking treasure though.
A Nuke Amy is the reason La Dolce Vita is really so
Oh,
good. It's more nihilistic than Marcello can handle, like abuses him
yeah.
to the
Which is
core.
saying something because he's got like the most disassociated face, like
Yes.
naturally dissociated expression of any man to ever live. Like this man was born depressed. Like he,
Whereas, okay, Strada, I'm gonna sound lame, but there is, well, Charlie Chaplin had an ineffable quality. So does Giulietta Messina. Clearly, Fellini made every choice deliberately and knew exactly those moments where Giulietta Messina transcended, for lack of better word, or maybe that's the only time that word should truly be used.
yeah,
It's like a silent film. Her emotionality, her emotions just not just
overwhelming.
universal, but eternal. Like you can feel them forever. Even in Nights of Cabiria, when she's crying, looking at the camera at you, like every time she's in something by Fellini, it's unreal.
Yeah,
And which lends itself to what would be known as Fellini-esque, being unreal, being slightly confrontational, but in a
yeah,
way that can be sweet and charming and full of meaning or
yeah.
meaninglessness. Like I like that.
No, I agree. I agree. And this is when he I mean, I guess he does this a lot throughout his career, less so in like the like La Dolce Vita and such, but where he picks actors, it seems like almost based on like physical qualities, like kind of innate qualities rather than performance. Like he's asking them to almost be themselves to a degree. Like like Anthony Quinn is just a big fucking guy who
Yeah.
looks mean, who looks angry, I'm sure he was maybe a nice guy, but he looks mean. He looks angry. He looks violent. And the
And the
fool
fool looks
looks like,
mischievous. Just
yeah, he looks exactly. And then Julia Messina's got these fucking giant eyeballs,
yeah.
and like every way she moves her mouth is so like emphatic. Like she's just naturally got an
And
extraordinarily, almost cartoonishly emphatic face.
and since we're going so hard on like the silent movie aesthetic or
Yeah,
even just grammar of the film, like that's where its magic truly is. We all know that most Italian films up until what like the 80s were filmed without sound. So like
exactly.
there was a great deal of emphasis placed on movement within the frame, on
Yeah.
yeah, the more
Being
not just
very
pantomime but emotive.
yeah, which is again very different from the time
But
where
which allows the because Anthony Quinn and the actor who played the fool, I'm pretty sure they're both like at least English
Americans.
speaking, yeah,
Yeah,
American,
they're both Americans
and that's why like if you get there's a dub version on here that I want to hear that actually has those two actors' real voices on it.
voicing themselves, whereas Julieta
Yeah,
Messina, I think, is voiced by someone else. I've heard bits of it. It's actually not that bad. Like Julieta Messina's voice actress, I don't think it's her. Actually sounds appropriate and like sounds correct for the role, but
but it allows like you said to vote by or to cast by instinct by certain qualities of the performer involved rather than because I'm sure that Anthony Quinn or there must have been like language barriers or something that would ordinarily keep them from being in a film like that.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And just La Strada is just fucking just beautiful, just a beautiful film. Um, the most haunting part for me, and Fellini has these little parts in all of his movies. I'll just explain what the part in La Strada is, and then you'll know what I mean when you're like, oh yeah, there's always that part of a Fellini movie that's kind of dark and morbid, but endlessly mysterious. It's when they're at like somebody's Gelsomina and Zampano are performing at somebody's wedding,
Yeah.
and Zampano is like screwing around with like the mother of the bride or something. And Gelsomina is taken by the children because she's aligned pretty much with children. Like she's a pure
Yeah.
clown in every way. If there's a child around, they're gonna gravitate towards her and vice versa. They bring her to where like this kid isn't allowed to come down to the party. And you don't know what's wrong with him, but Gelsomina tries to make him laugh and then like walks close to his bed and does that like I'm not gonna mimic the Gelsomina look, but it's a look of like curiosity, compassion, and like morbid understanding because I think the kid is supposed to be um like mentally very unwell or severely handicapped and is walking up to him and then it's like she's shushed out of the room and we never talk about that situation again and there's always those weird little moments that I find so mysterious. Like, what did Gelsomina see in him? I mean, if we're going with like this, she might be a little addled, she might be a little special. It could be like, what do you, you
Like
see what
this
I'm saying?
understanding of his situation.
Possibly,
But in a way
possibly,
that doesn't need to be verbalized because, of course, for
yeah.
he doesn't really get that other people don't see it. She doesn't really understand that, or she doesn't seem to understand that, like, for instance, Zampano doesn't see these things. Or she doesn't seem fully cognizant of the fact that Zampano doesn't experience the world in the same way she does. And that of course that also means that she is completely oblivious to how he sees the world and how he interprets the world and how the fool interprets the world and she's like kind of at a distance and that's why she gets like more and more weighed down as the movie goes on is because she's becoming more and more aware in a way of like her own difference from at least these two people or at least from this guy, her husband. She's becoming more and more aware of her difference from him, that she's not
And
the same as him in
and
some
if we go
way.
hard with these archetypes too, I'm not cutting you off. I'm adding to it. If we go hard with these archetypes of the fool being like a messenger of the film's
Mhm.
meaning, and
Mhm.
Gelsomina being also a clown, but hopeful, nearly childlike,
Yeah.
and Zampano being the brutality and the the inability to articulate itself of like mankind.
Yeah.
Like what like how does this man treat this childlike wonder? He
Yeah.
brutalizes it, rapes it, tries to domesticate it, tries to tame it. Uh,
Hmm.
and this childlike wonder, due to the fool's parable, and like this is the situation where the fool might have been kind of fucked up. Like she stays with him because of the fool, because of the parable of the pebble is
Yeah,
like the
she's
reason that
convinced
she
it's her
does.
mission in life to like fix him,
But
almost.
what's your feelings on that? Because I think that Fellini does believe in that.
Well, the thing is like I think ultimately it's true, but in like a more fucked up way than I think any of these people like predicted. Like I don't think Gelsomina consciously said like I'm going to die to fix him, but that's what ends up happening is she thinks she can through loving him change him when in reality it's only when she dies that he
Yeah.
kind of becomes cognizant of these things, and it needed to be something extreme like that
And
because
he might be
he
redeemed, but it begs the question, what's the point of living then if you have murdered that childlike wonder
it,
and you've murdered the mischievousness that is also childlike? Both the fool and Gelsomina are childlike in their own
exactly.
ways.
That's why I find this like a profoundly pessimistic
Yeah.
movie. It's like Zampano has like two paths. One is that like he stays the way he is and just shoots indiscriminately at the world around him for the rest of his life, lashes out at the world around him for the rest of his life in like anger and hatred, or woeful because he realizes the error of his ways too late and he has to wallow in like self-pity and depression now for the rest of his life. It's like those are the two options afforded to him. And so like the fool is right, she does save him from being this vessel for violence, but it's at the cost of her own life. And so it's like it's really depressing. It's like you're kind of like, you know, uh it's interesting because of course between the two of them, Gelsomina wasn't the one that needed to be saved, but in he was. But in order to save him, she has to suffer and die. And so it's like really, I don't know, it's like really kind of
It could
despairing.
get even more pessimistic too. Fellini
I
could
mean,
be saying that believing that life has meaning is childlike too.
yeah, exactly. And I mean,
And
like, there is something like kind of,
it's either childlike or foolish because the fool believes it and look where it got him.
yeah, exactly. Although there is kind of like this like very Christian worldview in
Yes.
this because it reminds me of like the thing about the Binding of Isaac, which is that like the truth of the situation is that like everyone's like, yeah, but he didn't have to do it because God intervened. But the point is that like had he done it, had he killed his son, he still would be like in the eyes of like their faith, like in morally in the right, which is
Yes.
like a Kierkegaard thing. I think he talks about that. He's like, the point is that had he killed his own son, it's like, okay, his son's in heaven now. His son's doing great. And so I feel like that's kind of like the angle at play in La Strada. It's like, yeah, they're fine. They're like in a better place, because obviously Gelsomina wasn't in a great place. Her
No.
fucking sister was dead, and she was getting sold off for money to a violent man. So it's like this world is awful, and so it's like it's almost like a litmus test for if you think they're better off now than when they started.
It's
Because in
also a
that,
litmus test for like empathy. I can't imagine a
yeah,
single viewer watching this movie and not wanting to like protect Gelsomina in
exactly,
a parental sort of way. Not even like a
exactly.
romantic, but parental. Like I want to hold on to that and make you.
Exactly. But at the same time, it's like that's almost kind of like it's like leading you on to have that
Mhm.
feeling on the situation, and yet at the same time it's kind of being like you're naive for feeling that way
Yes.
because there is nothing that can help her because she's in post-war Italy. She's a disabled woman who's not conventionally attractive, living in poverty in post-war Italy. She's fucked. Like she's fucked. They're all
Just
fucked. Like the
and
fool
like
is a circus entertainer.
yes,
Like
with a
he
death
works at a
wish.
fucking circus, he's not making money. Zampano has to beg for change on the side of the road by breaking his body for entertainment. He's
And Fellini goes the distance to prove just how lost Zampano is until the end. I mean, I mean, he makes it clear that he's emotionally bankrupt, and then the Christian themes do bleed into La Strada, where Zampano actually robs the nuns that Gelsomina almost joins, but stays with Zampano because of the fool's fucking parable. And I mean, once they leave there, they kill he kills the fool,
which
but
is
which
interesting
makes him
because
spiritually bankrupt.
it almost reminds me of like Joan of Arc. It's just like, yeah, she could have
Yeah,
lied to
yeah.
get out of dying, but then if she lied to get out of dying, that would not have been like the thing God wanted of her, like that she's not fulfilling this role she was born to fulfill. And so it's almost like there's this kind of determinism, like it feels like Fellini's suggesting that it's like Gelsomina's role in this life is to die to save this guy who doesn't deserve to be saved. He has like long given up
Yeah.
any right to happiness.
It's just brilliant. As I
Yeah,
said, the musical melody, the main melody of the film
exactly.
is transferred between the fool and Gelsomina. And I think the heart and the purpose obviously is transferred from the fool to Gelsomina. And when the fool is killed, it's like they had this link, and
Yeah.
that's when her brain completely collapses in on itself.
Yeah, she
Uh,
stops being who she
and
is.
that's when Zampano starts to become truly a sympathetic character.
Yeah.
Even when he's abandoning Gelsomina, he makes sure to give her a blanket and some food and some money.
Yeah, he's
Which,
like, you'll be fine, kid. You'll
yeah,
as if she's at all in any way, shape, or form capable of taking care of herself.
and I think it is worth noting that the fool, it wasn't a deliberate death. He didn't want to kill him. He like it wasn't his.
Yeah, it was accidental.
Zampano didn't want to do that. He
Yeah, it
wanted
was accidental.
to beat the shit out of him. He didn't want to
Teach him
kill
a
him.
lesson so he would leave him the fuck alone and stop messing with him.
And this is cool. In order to cover up the murder, he like throws his car over
Yeah.
and the car explodes, which I think in a Fellini way, um, just completely solidifies the idea that the fool is the angel, the messenger of purpose within the movie. Because don't angels appear with like a bit of fire and smoke
Yeah,
and
yeah,
disappear
yeah,
into
yeah,
similar
yeah,
ways?
exactly.
So we're watching something not only like psychological or philosophical, but also like spiritually damning in that scene, and it seals Gelsomino's fate, but also seals Zampano's ultimate sympathetic redemption at the end.
hmm
Like this film is pretty pretty beautiful, actually.
you did make me think of how the fool is like, again, going to that place of like what the god of this world seems to want in Lestrada is not really going to be understood by the people in it. So I think it
Yeah,
makes sense that like the guy who's coded as like an angel figure is not really likable
exactly.
and kind of fucking obnoxious and annoying because he doesn't care if he's liked or appreciated. He cares about creating the conditions for
That's
Zampano's ultimate
that's beautiful.
redemption, with
That's
his kind
beautifully
of
put.
ultimate like quote unquote hollow redemption, because it's like he's redeemed, but only by losing everything that gives his life value, and that's the only time he's able to realize he had things that were valuable in his life is when they're gone, and now it's like for what purpose? And it's like I don't know. Just shit happens, man. Like shit goes down. Shit goes wrong, and
That
you
was a beautiful way of putting it.
thank
That was
you.
good.
But yeah, it's fascinating. This is why of course why I said at the start I really love Zampano is I think he's a really compelling character and like a really tragic character
Well, I think
because
that's Fellini's ultimate test is if you can find it in yourself to love Zampano, then there is hope for humanity.
well it reminds me of Godard talking about The Searchers. he said it was something in effect of like, I need someone to understand that when I'm talking about this movie, he's like, the movie is an actor, John Wayne, revealing himself to be the person he really is, a reactionary racist, and putting himself on display for everyone to see him as he truly is, and being the most evil man you can possibly imagine, Ethan in that
Yeah.
movie. And then you love him at the end because he does the right thing. He doesn't kill his niece. He who may or may not be his daughter. He picks her up, and Godard said like when he picks up Natalie Wood in his arms and says, "I'm taking you home." He's like, "I love him like I've never loved another person before." Despite the past 2.5 hours showing me that he is the most like vitriolic, virulent racist
Yeah.
and you know the most evil man imaginable, but he does the right thing in the end, and that in itself is like this act of compassion that makes you in your own way compassionate towards him. And that's kind of how I feel about Zampano, is that it's like that you show this man that is completely undeserving of love and sympathy, and then
Has it unconditionally and destroys it.
yeah, exactly, and then at the end you are asked if you are willing to love him. Basically, it's like, oh, are you, now that you've seen all this, can you feel empathy for this man?
Would not work with anyone other than Anthony Quinn. Like I'm
Exactly.
convinced.
Exactly. He picks someone that's like, in this context, hard to love, hard
Yeah.
to feel bad for. He's not like, it's not like they picked I mean, we're gonna talk about Rio Bravo. It's not like you picked Dean Martin, someone who's like devastatingly attractive, and you're like, oh, I really want to love this guy. It's not like Lee Marvin, where I'm like, oh, he's just got such a heart of gold. I want to love him.
Lee Marvin. We're going over
Yeah,
the most likable people, and you're like Lee Marvin. You had
I
me at
love Lee
Dean
Marvin.
Martin.
He's so charming and funny. But like that's the thing, is like Anthony Quinn's not funny.
It's not like Marcello. It's not like
Yeah,
him at
yeah,
all.
he's not funny. He's not charming. He's
Yeah.
not attractive conventionally. He's a rough, coarse. Like you can feel that how fucking leathery his skin is. Like there's something like you're denied all like the easy excuses to empathize with this guy. You're asked to purely based on the situation he finds himself in.
And like, but before this ends, I just want to say also, when his when his full redemption comes, he's like walking down. It's some years have passed. I don't know how many, but he's walking down the street and he hears, and the sound is so good here. You hear that da 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 da, but
Mm.
it sounds ethereal. Like it doesn't
Yeah,
sound of the earth. It sounds angelic, but he locates it to this girl putting up laundry, and she says, "Oh, some girl used to sing that. She never really said anything. She died a while ago, actually."
yeah,
And that's the devastation, and he becomes consumed by the music that was shared between Gelsomina and the fool, and now it is drowning him in front of the ocean,
yeah,
essentially drowned by meaning lost, by lost
yeah,
meanings, by lost loves,
yeah,
and you can't not, your heart goes out to him when he, like, that is one of the most pure forms of loss I've ever seen
yeah,
expressed, is Anthony Quinn on In the Sand, just losing it. And also it's this character who has been unable, viciously unable to express his emotions. And right there, that's like one of the purest outpourings of emotion that I've ever seen. But
mm,
it took so much to get there. Before the movie even starts with the whole Rosa thing, he was already hateable. He was already damned. He
yeah,
was already doing something terrible.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
this film, once again, I'm going to sound a little lame. It's a film that really wants you to feel. It's a film that is about, you called it tactile. It's about being able to. It's a touching film in every way.
Yeah, I think of it as, I mean, obviously this isn't an innovative take, but or an original take, but it's called The Road. It's a movie about like life experiences, one's life beginning to end more or less. And how like things that are significant are only significant in retrospect, not in the moment. It's only in reflection that you see like the importance of these things
That's
and
what makes
people.
Gelsomina so cool. It's as if she could see the meaning in the moment.
Yeah,
Like that's
exactly.
also her walking up to the disabled kid's bed that like haunts me still. It's seeing the meaning within the
Exactly.
moment.
Because we're aligned with her. Because if we were aligned with Zampano, the movie's events would already have happened, if that makes sense. Like we'd be a movie that takes place from Zampano's perspective would feel like it's like one of those movies where he's telling you what happened to
And
him
that's Raging Bull's ultimate flaw.
exactly, because and this instead it's from Gelsamina's point of view. Gelsamina, I never know how to say her name. I always say Gelsamina, but she's you're seeing it from her POV in the moment because she exclusively seems to live in the moment. She doesn't seem to, think on the past or even on the future. She just kind of like it's just not how her mind works. Whereas Anthony Quinn is like woefully reflective. All he's kind of restricted by his past. So I don't know.
Where the fool, the fool,
Yeah.
I love that you brought up this living in the moment idea because the fool's last words are, "You broke my watch." Like
Yeah.
about the moment itself. That moment is about to be a damned moment, a doomed moment,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
It's
I
that
just love
thing
all
where
these
it's like
things
the
you're saying
moment
because
the
they're
watch stops is the moment you
yes,
know the person died. So you
yes,
can pinpoint like to a T the exact second that they died.
and it's like the two people who live within the moment, the fool and Gelsomina, like
Both die.
yeah, it's brilliant. You just
Yeah.
say like really interesting things that are supported by the film, and it's really nice.
Yeah.
But I think we're gonna end the Lestrada
Yeah.
conversation here.
I
Do you
love
have
this.
any final words on it?
No, I just love Lestrade. This has been one of my favorite movies for like 10 years now.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
It's
I love this
really,
film.
really, really special to me. Like I said, I feel like there's a point in time where I would say La Dolce Vita was my favorite Fellini, but then like as time wears on, like the movie my mind always goes back to by Fellini is La Strada. I don't know why that one's for, or at least for a long time I didn't know why. It's just like I'd be like, yeah, like that movie's really good, but like La Dolce Vita is like fucking La Dolce Vita, and I'm our chord. But I don't know. It's like Julieta
Well,
Messina wearing the clown makeup is the image that one of like the like top five like film images that's like burned into my retinas, you know?
Lestrada would be number three for me. It's not like I don't think it's fantastic.
No, no, I
Uh,
know what you mean. I know what you mean. It's just
I
one
think
of
it's
those
one of the best
movies.
films of the 50s, for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those movies that like for me like you don't really ironic given the conversation we just had about the movie. It's one of those movies where it's only like years after the fact are you like, "Oh, that's one of my favorite movies."
Yeah,
Like when you first watch it, you don't really think of it that way. You're like, "Oh, that was really good." And then once it becomes one of those movies that for like 10 years is always kind of popping up in your head for whatever reason, eventually you're like, "Oh, this movie's like really important to me." And it took like a long amount of time for
that's
me
the
to
power of Messina. That's the power
yeah,
of
exactly.
her.
I mean, I've been saying for years, I love to ridicule actors and their
Yes, you do.
craft,
You don't know the
their
point of
fake
them.
ass
That's
craft. But I've always said, I think for most of the last 10 years, I'm like, there's two actors I do respect though. Julieta Messina and Bela Lugosi. Those are two real fucking actors. Everyone could learn from these two. But for real, I'm always like, yeah, Julieta Messina. She's like one where I'm like,
yeah.
no, like what she is bringing as a performer is essential to what the director's doing. And the film would fail if it was someone else. If it was like a more conventional Italian actress of the time or anyone, the movie would have fucking failed.
Oh, imagine if it was Sophia Loren. Like, get
That's what
out
I'm
of
saying.
here.
Like it would have fucking failed. It would
Yeah.
have been miserable. It wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked. You could have picked any actress from any like Rossellini movie of the era. It would not fucking work. You could pick the girl from the opening segment of Paisan, the girl who gets shot
Right.
in the tower. Wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. Good actress, but it wouldn't work for what Lestrada's trying to do. It needs to be Giulietta Messina.
That's why her talent's so singular, and
Yeah,
she is a lot like Chaplin.
One of the
Uh,
most like unsung heroes of
she's
film.
an absolute legend.
Like she's only really celebrated by people in the know, like
Yeah.
people who were into Fellini when they were, young, and it
Well, I
became
think we can see what Fellini saw in her too.
oh,
I
easily,
love that.
easily, and why he regretted cheating on her constantly.
Which isn't Juliet of the Spirits an apology? Isn't that
Yeah,
entire
no, it
film an
literally is.
apology?
It's a movie about Julia Tomasina being like, "Wow, my husband's a piece of shit cheater."
Yeah,
It's like, "Wow, who made this movie?" Her husband and named the character Juliet. Like it's
yeah.
not fucking subtle. And I
And like
respect
surrounded by the women that he cheated on her
cheated
with.
on her with. I mean, 8.5 is also basically about
Yeah.
this. Yeah, this is the thing is like as time goes on, like all of Fellini's movies ultimately become about Fellini. Like they're all about
Hmm.
himself.
Yeah, yeah.
Which
But
you
I
could argue
I
for
think he's
Fellini, the
brilliant.
same thing happened, but in a more subtle way. But
I still I love him to death. Lestrada was great.
oh
Thank
no,
you
he's
all for
magic.
watching.